you hear my mic? How's the sound? Can I get everybody to take a seat, please? And welcome back. Sorry to sound so strict, but I've got a show to run here, people. It's not a drill. We have got a fabulous session, 2 sessions before lunch. So I hope that you have refreshed yourselves, whetted your appetite a bit, and now you're back in your seats and ready to go. This is a bit of a star panel that's coming up. This one is called Designing the Economy We Need. How refreshing, given that the one we have doesn't really work. Missions, Doughnuts, and Radical Collaboration. So, our first 3 stories told us of designs that are catalyzing new economies, empowering women, decentralized rural economies, the bioeconomy. They're incredible stories, but I'm sure that they, and you, all of us really, have experienced frustrations when the low-emission, circular, or regenerative design that you've come up with has to be curtailed because of commercial constraints, right? And it's always about the money. So as well as pushing things from the bottom up through our physical designs, we also have to work in a strategic way from the top down to redesign our underlying economic systems and how government achieves its objectives. The next 2 sets of conversations are going to share how we will use design to change the system. You are participating in a revolutionary and radical session, by the way, so I just hope you're aware of what we're expecting from you to go out and do after these 2 days. At the strategic level in business and government, and as a disruptor at a startup or even within a large organization. First up, we are thrilled to have with us 2 women who've been disrupting how we think about how the economy should work and how we see design as a strategic tool to do this. I'm sure you have read their books as I have. They've probably challenged and changed your thinking. And what we're going to have today will take that to the next level. Please join me in welcoming Kate Raworth, Professor Mariana Mazzucato, and Danny Sriskanraja, CEO of the New Economics Foundation, who's going to be bringing them together in conversation in public for the first time. Thank you.
So, hello everyone, I'm Danny Sriskanraja. It's a real privilege to be here with you all at what feels like a really momentous, important conversation. And it's an incredible privilege for me to be able to share the next 27.5 minutes on a stage with 2 of my heroes. These 2 people, Mariana and Kate, are, I would argue, 2 of our generation's leading economists. They're not just the world's most influential thinkers when it comes to redesigning the way the economy works, but as I hope we'll hear, you've inspired change in practice. You're practitioners as much as thinkers. It is a little bit intimidating to be with 2 amazing economists. I don't know if any of you know the old joke about 2 economists who got stranded on an island. They had nothing except their hats and they had no money, but over the next 3 years they made millions by selling their hats to each other. Now, the good news is these 2 are not those sorts of economists. They would, I think, be busy reinterpreting what the hat is, changing the nature of the market, changing the nature of human nature and relationships on their deserted island. And they'd be inspiring you to think differently. And there are very few people in the world who can say that the Pope is their fan.
He died.
And the late Pope, Pope Francis, was not just a fan of one, but both of these amazing economists. And I want to just say, so in Pope Francis's book, Let Us Dream, The Path to a Better Future, Pope Francis talks about Kate and thanks her for creating a design, the donut, about which we'll hear soon, that outlines a safe and just space for humanity with a social foundation of essential human needs inside a planetary ecological ceiling, and said that he saw her work as a way to create a distributive, regenerative economy. And then he praises Mariana's work, and particularly her book, The Value of Everything, saying that it had provoked a lot of reflection in him and that it offered a way of thinking that is not ideological, which moves beyond polarization of the free market capitalism and state socialism. And so I can't think of a better endorsement than a late Pope for the two of you.
We killed him off.
Yes, he's the late Pope, sir. But we've only got a short time, and what we want to do in this session, and I want to ask you about, is to describe what's wrong, help us think through how to fix it, and in particular, the role of design and designers. And so, Kate, perhaps I can start with you. In all of your work, you talk about the economy being fundamentally flawed, designed in a fundamentally wrong way. What is wrong with the way the economy works today?
I think the economy is designed for the accumulation of capital. And that's the design we've inherited from the 20th century. And it underpins so much of what does and doesn't happen. We heard amazing examples this morning of brilliant entrepreneurs who can make incredible stuff from Earth's materials, but it's so often blocked because the funding and the economic system and the organizational design isn't aligned with what's possible on Earth. So we've inherited a system that is still designing for the returns of capital, and we need to design for life. That's beginning, and you can feel it and hear it in this room, but as Natsei said at the end of her fantastic talk, we haven't got the economic and political paradigm behind us, and that's what we've got to also bring along as economic designers. What kind of economic system would be in support of what incredible people in this room are already able to do?
So what about people in the audience who might say, well, yes, you say there's a lot wrong with the economy, but in general, it's delivering for a lot of people, poverty has been reducing and so on. How worried should we be about the way that the economy is working or the economic system is working on people and planet?
You know as well as I, Danny, so I know. We couldn't be in a more perilous position. We're halfway through the 2020s. We're heading to 2030. I mean, we're a quarter of the way through the 21st century, for heaven's sake. And still, I think of students who are just going to university right now, right? It's university time. Off to study economics. They will be the policymakers of the future. They will design the economy in which all of these designers do their incredible work, and they're still being taught economics without almost any mention of materials or energy, but which are both foundational to life and on which everything works. So when we have an economic system that ignores that, what do you get? You get the extraordinary, perilous rebound of climate breakdown, ecological breakdown. You get unprecedentedly crazy inequalities rising in the world. I mean, I don't need to reel the stats, but just 1% of the world owns half the world's wealth. We've lost 70% of wildlife since the year I was born, 1970. We've got 200 billion of finance investing in nature restoration, 7 trillion, 35 times as much, destroying, damaging, depleting the living world. So we've created an economic system, a human-made system, utterly loaded against life and against thriving people. There is so much work to reverse that. Do we start now? Do we actually make the designs that we've heard this morning actually happen, actually become the reality? Or do we just drivel on with the system we've inherited? Surely it's time.
Thank you. Mariana, do you share that diagnosis of what's going on?
Absolutely. I think it's really useful at a design event just to begin with the point, given that we're two economists, that the economy is designed. There's nothing deterministic in the problems that we currently have, which Kate just rolled out some of the really, really stark problems, and there's many more. Other ones which she didn't talk about, but that we both address in our work, is this massive financialization of our economies, both in terms of the financial sector, but also the financialization of businesses. And many of those businesses are involved in real estate. So in terms of the financial sector, just in this country, 80% of finance, so the financial flows, go back to finance. Finance, insurance, and real estate, adequately called FIRE, right? So it's not just the climate that's on fire, but finance is on fire. It's basically just feeding itself. On the business side, right, you would hope that then finance actually reaches the so-called real economy, like industry, but industry itself is financialized. So over $7 trillion have been used by the largest companies in the world over the last 10 years just to buy back their shares, their stocks, to boost stock prices, stock options, and executive pay. That is a key driver of the inequality that Kate talked about. But there's nothing deterministic in that. We've allowed that. In fact, if you even look back just at the 70s and 80s, it was actually illegal in the US, for example, to undertake the types of stock buybacks that we have. And so all of these things are contracts in the end. The state, which is something that I think a lot about, not because the state is the most important actor, but it's one of the most under-theorized and problematic actors in the economy, has allowed a lot of this to happen. The fact that 80% of industrial wastewater is not recycled is something that the state allows when it gives the water rights to Pepsi-Cola, to the whiskey producers, to Anheuser-Busch. Put it in the contract. So we have really lazy contracts. So we can use words like partnerships, ecosystems, which sound sexy, but biologists, I often say, are much sexier than economists, literally. So when they look at ecosystems, they will bother defining the ecosystem. Everyone talks about like innovation ecosystems as though it's a good thing. It's just a neutral word, like partnership. What kind of partnership? What kind of ecosystem? And biologists say there's parasitic ecosystems, there's predator-prey ecosystems. They build models around this, and there's symbiotic and mutualistic ecosystems. I used to use the word reciprocity, but a famous guy in the US is using that for the tariffs now. So these kind of, fundamental good partnerships. What does it mean for housing? What does it mean for the way we structure our cities? Even sexy words like sustainable mobility, where are the profits actually going? Renewable energy, by the way, is one of the sectors that currently is avoiding the most tax globally. Right? So everything is designed. How we actually govern these processes matters, and I'm sure we'll come back to our solutions on that.
Brilliant. I think that's, in 6 minutes, I think you've convinced us, which, this issue that, most people think that there is something inevitable about the way that the economy works, right? But I think you've both said in very powerful ways that these are human design systems, and we can choose to fundamentally redesign the way that the economy works. In fact, where I work today, the New Economics Foundation, was inspired in part by the work of Fritz Schumacher, who wrote amazing books, one of which is called Small is Beautiful. And he said, back 50 years ago, that it is inherently dangerous to design an economy built on an orgy of envy and a frenzy of greed, because within it lies its seeds of its own destruction. And I think, Kate, as you've said, we're seeing those seeds. So let's move to what we can do about it. The amazing thing about both of you is you've got really powerful, compelling ways of understanding how the world could work. So, Kate, maybe you can tell us about this famous donut that Pope Francis loved.
Sure. I have one under my chair. So the donut is one way of thinking about a 21st century goal for humanity. And if you think of humanity's use of Earth's resources radiating out from the center of this picture, the goal is to leave no one in the hole, falling short in the middle on life's essentials, no one without the resources for health, education, housing, food, water, community, transport, the Sustainable Development Goals, right? Every government in the world has agreed that every person in the world has the right not to be left in that hole. But as we seek to meet everyone's needs and wants, we cannot likewise overshoot this outer ceiling. That is where we start putting so much pressure on the life support systems of our planet that we kick our planet out of balance. We cause climate breakdown, acidify the oceans, create a hole in the ozone layer. So it's about balance. And actually, I think the picture is really important. The 20th century shape of progress is never drawn, but it underlies every economist's advice, every politician's speech. It's endless growth, right? It's whoosh, through the ceiling. This is a very different shape of progress. This says it's about balance, finding balance between the social minimum and the ecological maximum. And the great metaphorical opportunity is that we already know this deeply in our own bodies. We know in our body that health lies in balance. We need enough food and water and oxygen and heat and exercise and sleep, and not too much of any of these. So homeostasis is exactly what keeps us all magically almost exactly the same body temperature. It's what keeps us alive. So we know deeply in the human body that success is about balance, that's health. Can we take that insight from the human body to the planetary body and move away from this paradigm of endless growth, which is merely a phase in the life of any successful organism? Everything grows, but then it grows up and matures. So to me, the great metaphorical, but also design leap is to move towards designing for health, which means care, which means regulating that system. And how do we then design ourselves back into the donut, how do we design, like Charlotte's brilliant clean cook stoves, Makuru, right? How do we make sure nobody is left in the hole of health, of food, of cooking? But how do we also come back within the ecological ceiling? It's the most phenomenal design challenge of our times. And some people might say that, you know, the current context is utterly overwhelming. I think the reason many people are in this room is they're like, this is a phenomenal time, not just to be alive, to be a designer. It's a really tough course, and as Natse said, you know, it's really, really, really hard to do, and I'm damn determined to make it happen. And that's the kind of determination I hear in every designer, every entrepreneur's intent. How do we design for humanity and planet to thrive together? So that is what the donut offers as a goal for designing for planet.
Great, thank you. Mariana, maybe you could tell us a bit about your work around missions, but also you've got a paper out today about public value. It's something that we don't really talk of art, which is something we don't really talk very much about. So
Sure. Can I first tell my Pope joke?
you can tell your Pope joke.
So in November, before he died, I went to meet him because twice a year I've been invited to basically speak with him. And the previous time he said to me, Mariana, un poquito de religión. He's like, you gotta be a bit religious. I'm like, I just can't do it. It's just not me. But my husband is religious in a deep sense, in the Bonhoeffer sense. So I brought my husband. And I thought my husband would be very respectful towards the Pope. You know, that's what people do, especially if they're religious. And he just says to him in Italian, listen, just one request. Can I please just go straight to heaven? Because I've already done purgatory with this one. I was like, and the Pope proceeded, but it would actually take too long to tell us a very funny joke about that. But anyway, so Marx actually, I think both of us, when we talk about capital, breeding capital, actually, you know, we're, how do you say, drawing on really interesting insights from Minsky, from Marx, from Schumpeter, from Keynes. But Marx said something really, really important that I think is important for this conference. He said, if you take a spider and look at a spider web and how beautifully designed it is, literally, like, you know, anyone who looks at a spider web, you just
Marx or Groucho
Karl Marx, sorry,
Karl
Karl
Marx,
Marx, in the Grundrisse, which were his notebooks for capital. And then he says, and then you look at a pretty bad form of architecture. In Italy, we have geometry, who are kind of architects wannabe. So, you know, a bad house on the Ligurian coast, not designed very well. He says, why is the latter superior to the former when we're all in awe looking at the spider web? And he said, because strategy preceded it. Humans, what makes us human compared to a spider is we actually think before we do. And that's really, really important because then that brings agency back to the core. It means that strategy matters, decisions we make actually matter. And so what I've tried to do in terms of the decisions that policymakers make that ultimately are, as I mentioned, not just about what they're doing, but the partnerships they're engaging in, whether it's with industry, whether it's with civil society, whether it's the financial sector, to put a lot of attention at the details of policymaking and revealing, actually what Keynes talked about was that you know, policymakers who think they're just doing things on the ground are actually slaves, he said, of defunct economic theory. So this defunct economic theory that has convinced many policymakers all over the world that at best, you know, at worst, get the hell out of the way. At best, you can fix a market failure, means that by design, not by coincidence, you're always too little too late, you're in reactive mode, and you're wasting a lot of time and energy, and all those, you know, civil servants who have limited time, just fixing things, picking up the mess, literally putting bandages here and there. To the point that even the best stuff, like the notion of the public good, sounds good, 2 words, one is good, is a correction for something that the private sector didn't do. So my work, including a new book I'm writing on the economics of the common good, tries to transform that. Say, move away from this corrective market failure fixing mode towards a shaping of an economy and a society that's goal-oriented, I call it mission-oriented, I'll come to that in a minute, and put as much attention to the how we relate to each other as to the what. And if you look at the common good in philosophy, from Aristotle, who talked about the telos, the goal, and the polis, the kind of decision-making, there's a lot, and today Michael Sandel and so on, there's so much that we can actually learn from political philosophy on that. And economists, again, at best, when we do talk about goals, that's sort of just derived from this kind of individual maximization behavior that we assume that everyone is just individualistic, even workers are modeled in economic theory as maximizing their decisions of leisure versus work, firms are maximizing profits, government is seen as also maximizing their electoral possibilities. So there's a whole new public management, public choice theory, how to get rid of this kind of danger of government failure. And so this idea that actually to solve these problems of climate, of water, of biodiversity, but also very local symptoms of that in our cities and in our neighborhoods, we have to fundamentally reverse this kind of type of reactive economics, talk about shaping, talk about the common good as an objective, and really pay a lot of attention to the how. So in this new book that I'm writing, which draws on an article I wrote recently, which also actually looks like a donut, I talk about these 5 principles that have to underlie it. The first is a mission-oriented approach. The second is who's actually deciding that mission. It has to be co-created and have participatory structures. A lot of the work we did in Camden, by the way, was around that. So we actually got citizens and housing estates, 10 housing estates, to debate and to talk about sustainability and to design the Camden Green Growth missions. The third pillar is knowledge sharing, so we don't get what we got in COVID, where people thought the vaccine was the purpose and the outcome, when actually the goal was to vaccinate the world, or at least to allow vaccines to be accessible in the world. Instead, we privatized the knowledge. Many of the companies continued to see even COVID as a gambling opportunity, and it was only when AstraZeneca, by the way, worked with Oxford University taxpayer-funded researchers that they were forced through the deal, that collaboration, to share the knowledge, because that was a symbiotic partnership, at least that the researchers were trying to design. The fourth pillar is reward sharing. There's no point in continuing to do what I talked about in my book, The Entrepreneurial State, back in 2013, where even Silicon Valley is a perfect example of where we socialize the risks, right? Every technology in your iPhone was government funded, internet, GPS, touchscreen, Siri, and then privatize the rewards. And you see that also in renewable energy today. Many of the way we're building our energy systems are socializing risks, privatizing reward, definitely AI and the future of AI. That's what we're currently seeing. And the fifth pillar is transparency and accountability. But to be honest, we can all come up with our circles and our slogans, but we've had actually some frameworks for a long time. For example, the Human Rights Declaration, which was signed by many countries, that's a design framework. It's not being used. We tried to use it in a recent paper on housing that I did with Leilani Fatha, who is the UN envoy for the right to housing, and we have housing as a human right, and we looked at the different human rights pillars on how we should be building our cities. But that's been there for 30 years, and we're not using it. Coming back to the point, we've decided not to use it. We've decided to have a financialized economy. We've decided to structure water rights, property rights, health collaborations around vaccines in problematic ways. And that's why we need to really look at concrete examples where we've done it differently and start scaling those examples.
Okay, well, let's get concrete for what's remaining of our time. So what advice would you have to designers in this building today who are designing sort of better products and services? Is the challenge then to design better stuff so people buy better stuff, not plough rather than plastic, or clean burning stoves rather than dirty burning stoves? Or is it to do something, to redesign the system, or is it both? And how should someone in this room take your sort of perspectives and models and apply it to their activities?
So I'll just say briefly that, I published Donut Economics in 2017, and the best thing that happened, I published it as like a mindset for transforming economics, and the best thing that happened was that town councils, mayors, designers, teachers, community leaders, businesses got in touch and said, we actually want to do this. We want to turn these ideas into practice. So I co-founded Donut Economics Action Lab to work with and learn from these incredible pioneers who are taking ideas and trying to do it, which is so hard because you're blowing in the wind of the whole system, right? And we've felt it and seen it on this stage this morning. So I think we need to redesign the system that sits underneath. There are brilliant designers working with energy, materials, bacteria, fungi. We also need to look at the system underneath that. And I love Mariana's approach of mission-led economy. And I want to show something very briefly that's deeply aligned with that. I would say to every designer, when you have a concept and an idea, be a detective about how you design its organizational structure. So very quickly, what is its purpose? Why does this even exist in the world? And what is it in service of in life? Why is this going to exist? the network of relationships, as Marianne is talking about, the partnerships. Who is in the room? Who is involved? Who needs to be in the conversation, as Natsai was telling us? Who needs to be at the table? As Charlotte was showing us, who making it? Who needs to use it? How is it going to be governed? Who's in the room? What are the metrics of success? How often are we going to govern that? Is it long-term, short-term? How is it going to be owned? Who owns the critical assets? Is it owned by a family, as an enterprise? Is it owned by an entrepreneur? Is it owned by venture capital? Is it owned by the government, the state? Is it owned by the community, as Alexei showed us? And this takes us to the bottom. I call this kind of like corporate psychotherapy, like the further you go down, the more profound it gets, and you all know what sits at the bottom. How is it going to be financed, and where is that finance coming from? And underneath every fascinating example we heard on this stage this morning, you will have noticed that there was a different story of finance. Having to find it, having to create it, not just design the product, having to design the finance that actually is in service to purpose, not in service to itself. So to me, that is sits underneath every single product concept anyone can show you, is the stack of organizational design. So be a detective about your charming seed funder. What are they here to really invest in the future, or actually to extract tenfold in 5 years' time? And be as wise as you are about the structures you set underneath your design as the materials or the algae or the bacteria or the cook stoves that you make, because only together will they actually enable your incredible entrepreneurial idea to happen in the world.
Great, thank you. Very clear. Mariana.
Sure. So in 2017, I set up an institute, which is actually a department at University College London, called the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose, which was all about bringing this notion of purpose to the center of both economic theory and then how we do things. And I invited, actually the first people I invited were designers, but especially organizations in the public sector globally that had thought about this. So Vinnova in Sweden, Citra in Finland, Design Lab in Denmark, these unfortunately all in these kind of faraway northern countries, but also in the global south, Corfo, which is a really, really interesting laboratory inside government and the Chilean government. And the idea was, how do we reimagine, how do we be really ambitious about design, about art, about culture, and how we even talk about what these goals are, what that purpose is, how do we make it a real conversation with citizens, especially in a moment where there's so much distrust, which then leads to populist politics. And that point about bringing some top thinkers back into the civil service is hugely important. So the statistic that Public Practice, a design organization in London, put out from some research is that it used to be that 49% of architects worked for the public sector. Today, it's less than 1%. So is it a coincidence, or by design, due to this kind of, again, financialization, privatization, that we've ended up with very problematic housing, with very problematic financialized forms of real estate? And by the way, I've always been struck how silent designers and architects actually are on some of these kind of financial questions, and I've been told it's because they're all earning commissions and their contracts depend on that, and so there is, I think, a bit of too much silence in that particular part, if you want, of our economies. And I'd love it if they all wrote many more articles in newspapers that we all read, not just kind of architecture journals. But anyway, so what we've done in the Institute is actually then find examples of where we can bring this notion of missions, purpose, at the center of how we rethink policies like industrial strategy, which usually are just kind of picking winners, picking certain sectors, whether it's creative industries, which sounds cool, renewable energy, even cooler, AI. That's not the point. The point is not to choose sectors, but to choose problems we need to solve and get as many different sectors in society to collaborate to solve those problems, holding them accountable through well-designed contracts, like procurement contracts. Procurement is often 30 to 40% of government budgets. It's often the source, actually, of corruption in many countries. And then to actually use the industrial strategy, whether it's public loans. I was in Scotland yesterday, launching actually a mission-oriented industrial strategy with the Scottish National Investment Bank was there. So loans, procurement, bailouts during COVID, property rights, water rights. These are all opportunities to crowd in innovative solutions bottom up in the business sector to solve problems. Now, that doesn't happen by just saying we're all in it together, let's go out there and solve problems. A mission-oriented approach starts with a challenge, let's say climate change, turns it into a mission that is as concrete and directed as going to the moon and back in a short amount of time, where you can actually say yes or no. Did you achieve it? Conspiracy theories aside that say we never did that. And then actually gets all these different sectors. To get to the moon, it wasn't just aerospace, it was materials, electronics, software, all sorts of different industries. But the government had to actually change, in order to direct this mission, their procurement contracts. They changed it from just cost plus, which is bottom line thinking, that's how we currently do procurement, towards challenge-oriented procurement, and it was solving all those different problems. How would they go to the bathroom? How would they eat? What would they wear? And if you think of climate change, what do we eat? What do we wear? How do we build the cement and the steel that we use? But those things don't change on their own. So using something like a public loan to transform even a boring sector like the steel sector. And that only happened, by the way, in Germany recently, because they had a very clear mission around the Energiewende, that then forced their public bank, called the KfW, to transform how they were relating to sectors like steel. And the only way that the steel sector got the loan they received was conditional that they would agree to lower the material content of production, the repurpose, reuse, recycle technology. That would not have happened if they just went to Davos to talk about purpose. They had to do it to get one penny. Whereas in this country, we tend just to give money out. During COVID, we gave $600 million to EasyJet, no conditions attached. Same COVID bailouts in other countries that have had a more symbiotic partnership, very different.
Brilliant. We are now out of time, but thank you. If you want to know, we're out of time for this session, but I hope the one takeaway from this session is we're not out of time to fix the way the economy works. And that's the challenge, right? That's a challenge for you all. You need to design better products, services, things, but we also urgently need to fundamentally redesign the way the economy works. And the good news, it's possible, and the great news is these two amazing economists have ready-made frameworks and applications to help guide you. So please look them up and their work, but please join me in again thanking Kate and Mariana.